What if I told you that the last prophecies before the flood were not spoken by prophets, but dreamed by giants who felt the sky slowly turning against them? Long before the first raindrop ever touched the earth, their sleep filled with rising waters, broken trees, vanishing cities, and a world slipping quietly beneath a dark and endless sea. Tonight, you and I will move gently through those final nights. We will listen to the fragile fragments of the Book of Giants discovered in desert caves, trace their echoes in ancient pages, and uncover what these towering beings saw when their strength could no longer protect them. By the end of our journey, you will understand what they feared, why their dreams troubled them, and how those visions whispered of a judgment already written. Before we step fully into that mystery, let me invite you to become part of this quiet circle of night listeners. If these deep biblical sleep stories help you rest or think differently about the ancient world, take a moment to subscribe so you don't miss the next journey. In the comments, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there right now. I love seeing how these ancient stories travel across continents and time zones, connecting us in one shared hour of stillness. And if the title, The Giants' Final Dreams Before the Flood, already stirred something in you, share this video with someone who might feel that same quiet sense of recognition. Now, let your body begin to grow still. Let your shoulders loosen, your jaw soften, and your hands rest wherever they are. Feel the weight of the day sliding off you like a cloak gently set aside. With each slow breath, imagine the noise of the modern world fading into the distance until there is only a soft hush, like waves murmuring beyond the shore. You are safe here, listening from the edge of another age. As the giants close their heavy eyes and their final dreams before the flood begin to rise. On the nights before the flood, the world did not yet know it was ending. The markets still opened in the morning. Ovens still glowed. Children still chased one another through dusty streets. Yet in the high halls where the giants slept, a different weather had already begun. They were not men as you and I are. Their shadows stretched across walls like moving pillars. Their hands were wide as doors. Their laughter shook the beams of their houses. People spoke their names with a mix of awe and quiet fear. And then, without warning, those vast and confident beings began to dream. At first, it was only one or two. A giant would wake before dawn, breath ragged, chest heaving, and peer into the darkness as if searching for something that had been taken. He could not describe it clearly, only that the sky in his dream had felt heavy, like a ceiling about to fall. One saw clouds hanging too low, bruised and swollen, their bellies flickering with a strange inner light. Another saw the moon blurred behind a curtain of motion, as though a veil of water were falling between heaven and earth. They laughed it off in the morning. Even the mighty have restless nights. They said, even the strong can be touched by shadows, but dreams are patient messengers. Night after night they returned, adding detail, the way ink slowly bleeds across a scroll. A giant, standing on the balcony of his stone palace, would see, in his sleep, the valley below fill with a quiet sea. No wind, no waves, only a rising sheet of water that lifted roofs from their beams and loosened towers from their foundations. In another dream, the streets of a great city became riverbeds. Doors swung open and shut beneath the surface like tired mouths. The giants themselves watched from high places, unharmed, yet unable to move, as though they were statues set to witness their own undoing. In the language of those days, no one had yet spoken the word flood as we use it now, as a proper name for the breaking of the world. Rain had fallen. Of course, Rivers had swelled and then slipped back into their banks. But the dreams of the giants were not of storms that pass. They showed a world that did not drain, a sky that did not clear. Some saw mountains softened into shapes they did not recognize, their edges blurred by water creeping up their sides. Others saw the sun as a pale coin pressed against thick clouds. Unable to burn through, the air in those visions felt heavy in the lungs, as if part of the sea had risen to live where the wind once ruled. The people, small beneath their shadows, noticed the change even if they could not name it. The giants, who had always strode through the streets with careless certainty, began to pause at doorways and look upward with a faint crease between their brows. At night, their feasts grew louder, the music faster, as if they might drown out whatever hunted them in their sleep. Servants whispered that their masters tossed and muttered on their stone beds, fingers flexing as though grasping for something they could not hold. Some giants woke with their faces wet, though they would have died rather than admit to tears. They called it sweat, the remains of a troubled night. But in quiet moments, their eyes searched the horizon, measuring the distance to the hills. In those same days there lived farmers, craftsmen, shepherds, and wanderers who moved through the world almost unseen. They did not tower over others. Their hands bore more calluses than rings, while the giants traded secrets taught by the watchers, raising high towers and cutting deep into the earth. These quieter souls watched weather and soil and the turning of stars. One of them would later be known as Noah. Another, older still, would be remembered as Enoch, the man who walked with God and was not, for God took him. Between such men and the giants lay a distance greater than height, the distance between those who listened for the voice of heaven and those who trusted the strength of their own walls. As the weeks passed, the dreams began to overlap. Two giants who had never shared a meal woke with the same image burning behind their eyes, a line drawn across the sky, bright and merciless, and below it a swell of water that erased every border. Another, whose halls were filled with carved images of himself in battle, dreamed that every statue bearing his face cracked down the middle and slid into the sea. Around their stone tables the stories finally spilled out. At first they jested, "Is giant do?" telling tales of wild night visions between bites of roasted meat. Yet as one spoke, others fell silent, hearing their own secret fears mirrored back to them. Someone asked, in a voice barely above a whisper, whether the watchers had sent these things, or whether some higher hand was at work. None of them spoke the word judgment, but it trembled between them like a note held in the air. For now the world still turned. Only in the hidden theater of the night had the first storm truly begun. Within that unseen chamber, the giants who had once seemed unshakable found themselves standing on floors that shifted beneath them, watching silent seas rise behind their closed eyes. Their strength, which had always been their shield, could do nothing to quiet a dream. They did not yet know what the images meant, only that something was moving toward them, slow and certain, somewhere far beyond the reach of their towers. A man who listened for God was already being drawn into the story. Soon their night visions would drive them to seek him, to send a messenger across wild country in search of the one who walked with God. And so, as another evening spread its colors across the sky, the giants returned to their halls, each secretly afraid of what might meet them on the other side of sleep. Torches hissed and dimmed. Music faded. Doors closed like the lids of great stone chests. Above the roofs, the stars looked down, patient and unhurried. One by one, the mighty lay down their enormous heads, not knowing that the questions rising in their dreams would soon send one of them on a journey to find the man whose prayers could reach the heights they could not touch. On the edge of the giant's great city lived one whose name would survive only on torn scraps of leather buried in desert caves. His name was Mahway. He was not the first among the warriors, nor the highest in council. Yet the others trusted him with the far places. He could read the horizon the way a sailor reads waves, sensing subtle changes in color and air before anyone else saw them. When caravans needed a path through unknown country, they called for Mahway. In an age ruled by raw strength, his gift was distance. He knew how the world looked when the city lay small behind him. One night, after the feasting fires had sunk to red circles on the floor and the music had faded into a faint hum, Mahway lay down upon his stone bed, the weight of his body pressed into the slab. Familiar and solid, he expected the usual slow drift of sleep, a slide into dark without shape. Instead, the world dropped away. The stone beneath his back vanished. The heaviness left his limbs. There was an instant of startled stillness, like the moment between lightning and thunder, and then he was rising through the air. The city that had always seemed too small for him now shrank with each breath. Roofs folded into patches of dull color. Broad streets narrowed to pale lines winding between them. The people, if they were there at all, were no bigger than grains of sand. Mahway did not leap. He did not feel any wind on his face. Something unseen had taken hold of him and was lifting him higher, carrying him as easily as a leaf is carried on a quiet current. He rose past the towers the watchers had taught them to build, towers that scraped the lower clouds, and then even those clouds slid beneath his feet. Above him the sky deepened into a dark, living blue. Stars burned around him like slow, patient embers. In fragments of the Book of Giants found among the Dead Sea Scrolls at Qumran, it is written that Mahway traveled by dream to a place where a great tablet awaited him. The pieces we have are small and broken, yet they are enough to show that his vision was not a simple wandering of the mind. It was a journey. In the quiet cinema of the night we can see him now, carried higher and higher until the curve of the earth is revealed below. Rivers like thin silver threads, mountains like frozen waves, the rush of his life, the noise of feasts and battles, fall behind him until all he can hear is his own breathing and the soft, immense silence of the heights. Out of that silence a brightness begins to grow. It is not the harsh blaze of noon on sun-struck stone, but a gentle, steady radiance, like morning light passing through mist. In the center of that light, something flat and solid takes shape, broad as a floor, yet suspended on nothing. It is the tablet the fragments whisper about, a slab that seems to be made of stone and fire at once. Mahway feels himself slow, as if the unseen force that lifted him were now lowering him with care toward its surface. He cannot feel his feet, yet he knows he is drawing near. Across the face of the tablet lines have been cut. They are not the hurried scratches of market ledgers or the proud banners carved above city gates. These marks feel older than his people's strength and older than the watcher's knowledge. He cannot read them, but they press against his mind the way thunder presses against the chest. Somewhere inside he senses that they speak of beginnings and endings, of the first breath drawn by the world and the last breath drawn by the giants. The nearer he comes, the more the air vibrates with a quiet, unspoken sentence. For a heartbeat he thinks of the promises the watchers made when they first descended, glittering on the mountains. They boasted of mysteries, of weapons, of charms to bend the earth and sky. They taught the giants how to raise walls that kissed the clouds and how to pull bright metals from the deep. Yet standing above this single slab, Mahway feels that all those lessons were only fragments chipped from an unseen whole. Whatever is written here does not belong to spirits hungry for worship. It feels like the work of the maker of the world itself. Simple and absolute. Like the pull that keeps the sea bound to the shore. He leans closer. If leaning is even the right word for a movement made without weight. The markings sharpen. For an instant, they almost resolve into sound. He does not hear words with his ears. But a meaning brushes past him, like a hand passing through water. He sees towers sinking. Yes, and cities swallowed. But beneath that he feels a grief deeper than the giant's fear. The flood hinted at on this tablet is not a tantrum. It is cleansing, terrible and sorrowful at once. Like fire applied to a wound to burn away sickness. For a moment, Mahway understands that his world's strength has become a bruise on the face of creation. Then, the tablet shudders. A crack appears at one edge, thin as a line of light. It runs across the surface with the suddenness of lightning. The slab splits in two. The pieces tilt away from one another and begin to fall into the dark beneath his feet. The meaning that had brushed so close slips with them. Mahway reaches out with hands he cannot see, his fingers close on emptiness. Down below, far below, the broken halves tumble toward a shadow that might be land or sea, or both together. A fragment from Qumran says simply that the tablets sank. In his dream, the distinction no longer matters. What could have been read is descending into a depth he cannot follow. He falls after it. The gentle stillness of the high air vanishes. Wind roars. The stars smear into streaks of pale fire. The world below rushes up. Yet the tablet falls faster. Always just beyond his grasp. Always a little deeper, until the darkness swallows it whole. In the last instant, before he loses sight of it, he sees a dull gleam where the stone meets an endless surface. It is like watching a verdict slip beyond the reach of appeal. Then there is only the dizzy rush of descent and the taste of fear rising like bitter water in his throat. Mahway wakes with his heart pounding the way drums pound before battle. The hall around him is quiet. Only a few embers glow in the braziers. Breathing out thin threads of warmth, his great hands are clenched so tightly that his nails have drawn small beads of blood from his own skin. For a long time he does not move. The dream has left no images he can sketch on a wall. No words he can repeat exactly. Yet its weight presses on him like armor he cannot remove. He knows that he has been shown something true and that he has failed to hold it. Somewhere above the world there is a tablet bearing the story of his people. And it is sinking away from him into a flood he cannot escape. By morning the other giants will gather beneath the high beams of their hall, trading stories of trees uprooted, towers collapsing, cities swallowed without a sound. When Mahway speaks, his vision will thread through theirs like a cord, tightening their shared dread. For the first time since they began to rule, they will admit that there are heights their strength cannot reach, and writings their wisdom cannot read. And as talk turns to whispered tales of a man named Enoch who once walked with God and was taken, more than one heavy gaze will come to rest on Mahway. The Swift One. His night journey above the world is not the end of his part in this story. It is the summons that will soon send him out across the hills to seek the only man they believe might read what was written in the giant's final dreams. On the second night, after Mahway spoke, the dreams no longer came one by one. They fell over the giants like rain, finally finding a crack in the sky. In the high hall, with its carved pillars and hanging lamps, warriors, who feared no army, now dreaded the moment when torchlight dimmed and shadows grew long. They had heard Mahway describe his flight and the falling tablet. How the writing he could not read slipped away into darkness. Now, as they lay their great heads upon stone and wrapped themselves in heavy cloaks. They wondered what shape their own portion of the warning would take, somewhere beyond the reach of their walls. The first mists of judgment were already rising. Inside, sleep opened like a door. For one of them, the dream began in a garden, not the narrow courtyards of rich houses, but a wide and ancient place that seemed older than any city. In its midst stood a single tree so tall that its crown vanished into bright haze. Its trunk was thicker than the towers that guarded their gates. Birds of every color nested in its branches. Beasts rested in its shade. Clear streams curled around its roots as though the waters themselves desired to stay near it. The dreaming giant knew, without being told, that this tree was his people. Every ring hidden within its trunk was an age of their strength. Every spreading branch was a city they had raised. Every bird and beast sheltered, there was a nation living under the shadow of their power. At first, the sight filled him with pride. He walked slowly around the tree, feeling the ground tremble slightly beneath its immense weight. Yet as he circled, unease rose like a chill. He saw that some roots plunged into clefts that leaked a faint, unhealthy light. Others coiled around stones carved with symbols he recognized from the Watcher's lessons. Marks that whispered of charms and bindings. The water that once ran clear around the trunk was clouded in places by a dark sheen. It glistened on the surface like oil, leaving a bitter taste in the air. A wind rose, smelling of distant oceans and rain on bare rock. The birds stirred uneasily. Beasts lifted their heads, somewhere high above, beyond the limit of his sight. A sound like an axe being lifted drifted down, not with the clatter of iron, but with the soft inevitability of a decision made long ago. He did not see the axe, only its work. A tremor passed through the tree from root to crown. Leaves shivered. Birds burst from the branches in a chaotic cloud. A crack opened along the bark, thin at first, then widening as another unseen stroke rang out. Each impact seemed to echo with a word he could not quite hear, a word that might have been enough. The streams pulled away from the trunk as if gently redirected by an invisible hand. The beasts scattered from the shade, alone beneath the failing colossus. The giant watched as the tree leaned, slowly and helplessly, toward its fall. Another giant, far away in another hall, dreamed not of a tree but of a tower. He stood at its base and watched its upper stories vanish into low clouds. Around its circumference, scenes of their history had been etched in deep relief. Battles won, cities founded, the descent of the Watchers, teaching them arts of war and craft. At the very top, though he could not see it clearly, he felt that an image of his own face had been carved larger than all the rest. The tower was proof, in stone, that their story could not be erased. Yet as he gazed up, the flagstone beneath his feet shifted almost imperceptibly, as though the ground had sighed. A fine line of dust trickled from a crack between two massive blocks, and hairline fractures began to thread quietly through the carved reliefs, sparing none of the proud images. When he woke, his breath was shallow, his throat raw with unspoken cries. Across the city, others were rising from similar visions, each with their own symbols of collapse. Walls that melted into sand, statues that dissolved in their own shadows, feasts that turned to ash the moment they were tasted. Among the fragments preserved at Qumran, names like Oya and Haya surfaced beside Mahway, their dreams speaking of trees and houses destroyed, of bodies and buildings swallowed up together. Though the parchment is broken, the pattern is clear. The giants saw that the structures representing their greatness would not be gently retired. They would be broken, uprooted, laid low. By the time the sun climbed above the horizon that second morning, a heavy quiet lay over the hall of the mighty ones. Servants moved softly, sensing the brittle edges of their master's moods. In small knots the giants gathered, telling their dreams not with swagger, but with the halting cadence of men confessing wounds. Mahway listened as tree and tower, tablet and house, wall and statue, all fell in different minds, yet with the same finality. No one laughed now. No one brushed the visions aside as tricks of the night. The shared weight of them pressed the air flat. For the first time, they spoke openly of a writing in heaven that even the watchers might not overturn. Old stories, half believed, rose from the corners of memory. Tales of Enoch, the man who walked with God, the scribe who had written for men and for spirits. In the end, they turned to Mahway. He had flown highest in his vision. He had seen the tablet before it slipped away. His feet knew distant paths. His eyes could read the land far from their walls. If anyone among them could find the man who walked with God, it would be him. With few words and many heavy looks, they chose him as their messenger, carrier of all their broken symbols. As the day wore on and the sun traced its slow line toward the west, preparations were made quietly. At the threshold of the city, while evening laid long shadows across the ground, Mahway paused and looked back at the towers that had haunted their sleep. The sky above them was still clear and bright. But something in him knew the dreams were telling the truth. Somewhere ahead, beyond the hills and the known roads, waited the one whose pen had once moved in harmony with the tablet he had seen. Mahway traveled for many days, with the dreams of his people pushing at his back like an invisible wind. Each morning he watched the sky move from grey to gold and searched the horizon for dark walls of water. But the rivers stayed in their beds, and the hills held their familiar lines. That troubled him more than thunder would have. It made the visions feel like a secret storm only the giants could see, gathering in the unseen heights while the world walked calmly beneath it. Behind him, the towers of his city sank lower with every step until they were only a smudge at the edge of memory. Ahead lay the country the old tales whispered about, where a quiet man named Enoch had once lived and prayed and somehow walked into the hiddenness of God. At last the built places fell away and the land grew soft and open. Stone gave way to brush and low trees, to long grasses that whispered around his ankles when the wind moved. At night he lay on his back and stared up at a sky so clear that the stars seemed almost within reach. Those were the hardest hours. Sleep crept toward him like an unseen animal, and he feared what it might bring. More than once, he jolted awake with the sensation of falling, his hands clutching at empty air as if the radiant tablet might still be caught before it sank. In the long dark he sat and listened to the wind slide along the ridges and wondered whether other giants were waking at that same moment with the same bruise of fear beating inside their chests. One evening, when the air turned thin and cool, Mahway saw a small cluster of tents ahead. No towers, no walls, only low shelters. A handful of animals tied near rough posts, and a single fire sending a narrow thread of smoke into the dimming sky. The sight was almost jarring. He had grown up among stone halls and bronze braziers taller than a man, where doors were built to fit shoulders like his. Here everything seemed scaled to a different kind of life. As he drew nearer, the voices faded. Children froze in place. Some hid behind their parents. Others simply stared, wide-eyed, at the massive figure, trying to place his feet carefully between their tools and stones. Mahway slowed, lifted his hands, and spread his empty palms, hoping his gentleness would travel farther than his shadow. From the line of tents a man stepped forward. His hair was streaked with grey, and the years had drawn fine lines around his eyes. Not only from age, but from long thought. Measured in height, he was ordinary. Another small human on the face of the earth. Yet there was a quiet steadiness about him that made the giant feel, for the first time, as if he were the one who had come up short. The man's gaze was clear and searching. Used to looking past surfaces into deeper patterns, the name rose in Mahway's mind before anyone spoke it, as if the stories he had heard since childhood were answering him. This was Enoch, the one who walked with God. The camp held its breath while a towering messenger from the halls of the mighty and a thin man whose strength rested in invisible places regarded one another across the soft ring of firelight. That night they sat by the flames with a respectful space left between them. The people of the camp stayed back, but their curiosity hung in the air like smoke. On his long walk, Mahway had rehearsed proud speeches, imagined himself speaking as envoy for a race of kings. Yet under that steady gaze the words slid away. He spoke instead as a burdened soul. He described the dreams that had broken the giant's sleep, how terror had crept into halls that had never feared any sword. He told of his flight above the world, of the tablet suspended in light, of the crack that ran across it, of the way it slipped into darkness where his hands could not follow. He recounted other visions that had spread through their ranks. Trees cut down, towers split, images of their greatness dissolving like dust in rising water. Enoch listened without interruption. His hands rested palm up on his knees, as though ready to receive every word. Sometimes he closed his eyes, not to sleep, but to let the images settle. When Mahway faltered, ashamed to confess how afraid the dreams had made him, the man's expression did not harden. It softened, lines of compassion deepening at the corners of his eyes. He knew something of heavy messages and the cost of bearing them. In the writings that would later be linked to his name, he would be remembered as a scribe of judgment for the Watchers themselves, the very spirits whose teachings had raised the giants up. Now he heard in Mahway's broken account an echo of that older story, the consequence of heavenly rebellion running through stone and flesh. When at last the giant fell quiet, the space between them was gentle, not condemning. The fire popped softly, crickets wound their thin music through the grass. Enoch bowed his head, as though listening to a voice Mahway could not hear. After a long moment he spoke, quietly enough that the giant had to lean in to catch each word. The dreams, he said, were not trivial. They were part of a pattern that had begun before Mahway was born. The Watchers had stepped past the boundaries set for them. The giants, born from that crossing, had filled the earth with pride and violence until creation itself was bruised under their weight. The visions of falling towers and sinking tablets were signs that the Maker of all had drawn a line that would soon be enforced. Yet judgment, Enoch added, was not the whole tale. Behind it stood a sorrow deeper than the giant's fear, the grief of a God who refused to let cruelty rule forever. The coming flood would cleanse, but it would not be a careless erasing. It would be like water poured over a stained cloth, like fire held to an infected wound, painful yet aimed at healing. With his head bowed low, Mahway spoke for his kind as best he could. The words were awkward in his mouth, unused to confession. They had used the knowledge given by the Watchers to tear at the world instead of tending it. They had taken what they wanted and called it strength. They had crushed the fragile, the small, the quiet. Now their dreams were showing them the end of that path. His voice shook as he asked the question that had driven him over hills and through lonely valleys. Was there anywhere left for them to turn? Could someone who walked with God speak on their behalf? Enoch lifted his eyes to the stars. His life had been a long conversation with the unseen. He had walked with God until the boundary between heaven and earth had worn thin around him. He knew the certainty of what was coming. Yet seeing Mahway there, so vast and yet so undone, he also felt the pull of compassion. He could not rewrite what had been inscribed on the heavenly tablet, but he could carry the giant's confession into the presence he had known since his youth. Softly he told Mahway that he would seek an answer, that he would stand once more between the heights and the earth to ask whether mercy remained even now. As the fire burned low and the camp drifted into sleep, the giant lay not in a stone hall but beneath open sky. The grass was cool against his back. The stars wheeled silently above. The same lights that had watched the watchers fall and the cities rise. Somewhere beyond that bright canopy, Enoch believed. The author of the tablet still listened. The man who walked with God rose quietly and went out from the circle of light, climbing a nearby hill until his figure was a small shape against the sky. There, in the hush before dawn, he would begin to pray and to receive the word that would seal the giant's fate. For now Mahway closed his eyes. Sleep gathered around him with its familiar darkness. And in the narrow space between fear and rest, a thin thread of trust appeared, fragile as breath on a cold morning. As the story moved from the dreams of giants toward the silent waiting of heaven, dawn came pale and quiet over the hill where Enoch had stood to pray. From the camp below, Mahway saw him as a thin shape against the light, a man small enough to vanish behind a stone, yet somehow carrying the weight of the night on his shoulders. All through the dark hours the giant had dozed and started awake, hearing fragments of Enoch's voice borne on the wind, too soft to catch yet steady enough to calm his fear. Now the praying man turned, as if answering someone just beyond the edge of hearing, and began to walk down toward the waiting camp. In the visions preserved under Enoch's name, he is sometimes taken beyond the ordinary world and shown the hidden frameworks of creation. On this night, as his people slept and Mahway waited, that gift of sight was given a single focus. The dream of the falling tablet and the uprooted tree had been part of a larger story. To understand it, Enoch was drawn once more into the realm where the watchers now sat beneath the shadow of their own judgment. He did not rise on visible wings or feel any rush of air. One moment he knelt on the stony hill. The next, he found his inward eyes opened to a different country. Before him stood beings whose radiance would have shattered lesser minds. Spirits who had once descended, gleaming onto the mountains to offer forbidden knowledge. Now they were confined. Their glory seemed veiled as if behind a thin cloud. Their eyes were lowered. Chains held them, not of iron, but of certainty. The decision about them had already been spoken. They awaited not trial, but sentence carried out. Around them stretched a silence deeper than any Enoch had known on earth. The hush of a court where the verdict is beyond appeal. Some of the watchers lifted their faces as he drew near. In a few he sensed stubborn defiance, a rigid clinging to their choice. In others he glimpsed something closer to grief, though whether it was for themselves or for the world they had scarred, he could not yet say. Once they had begged him to write a petition, to ask the Most High to lessen their fate. He had carried their words upward and received the answer. There would be no change. In that heavy quiet, the meaning of the giant's dreams unfolded. The toppled towers, the shattered tablets, the fallen trees were not random phantoms of the mind. They were reflections of this higher decree. Echoes thrown down into the sleep of those whose lives were bound to the Watcher's rebellion. The giants had used heaven's gifts to magnify their own strength and to grind the weak into the dust. The flood was not the anger of a passing storm. It was the cleansing of a world that could not bear much more weight. Enoch felt no thrill as he stood among these bound spirits. Instead, he carried the sober ache of a messenger who must speak words he did not choose. He thought of Mahway, huge and strangely vulnerable, waiting on the slope below. He thought of cities where children grew up in the shadow of weapons, of fields stripped bare by greed, of cries that rose from hidden places and seemed to hang unanswered in the air. Justice, he sensed, was not the opposite of love. It was love refusing to let cruelty write the final line of the story. Then came the voice that had walked with him since his youth. Not in thunder, but in a depth of knowing that filled his whole being. He was told what to say. The giants were to hear that their dreams spoke truth. Their generation would not continue as it had. The earth would be washed. Their halls and names would be cut down like a diseased tree. Not out of spite, but so that new growth could come. Yet the same voice spoke of a remnant, of a quiet man building with wood far from the places where feasts roared. The flood would carry away much, but it would also bear the seed of a gentler world. The vision folded like a scroll. Enoch felt the solid chill of the hilltop under his knees again, and the faint sting in his joints from long waiting. Morning light brushed the stones with grey. Below, Mahway rose as he approached, his great hands opening and closing as if reaching for a verdict he dreaded to hear. The camp gathered at a respectful distance. The earth seemed unchanged. Only the look in Enoch's eyes hinted that something vast had moved in the night. He spoke softly, as he always did, but each word fell with the quiet firmness of rain that has finally begun. He told Mahway that he had stood again before the Most High and looked upon the watchers in their confinement. Their plea refused. He told him the dreams were faithful. The broken tablet would not be restored. The fallen towers would not be razed. The giant's age would end in water. Yet he also told him that the flood was not aimed at erasing every living thing, that an ark was being prepared as a shelter within the storm. Beyond the judgment lay a sunrise they would not see, a world rinsed clean for those who would learn to walk in a different way. Mahway listened until his shoulders sagged under the weight of the news. There would be no clever escape or bargain struck. Still, as Enoch spoke of warning given and time remaining before the first drop fell, a strange calm touched even the giant's troubled heart. Their dreams were not a cruel torment. They were a last lantern held up in the dark, showing clearly where the path ended. Enoch would send him back with that lantern, to carry the message into halls that had never before bowed to any word but their own. Long after that morning, the memory of this meeting would survive only in broken lines, scattered among the Ethiopian Book of Enoch and the fragmentary Book of Giants, tucked into jars in desert caves. For many centuries the world would forget that the giants dreamed at all. But far ahead, on a dry afternoon above the Dead Sea, a shepherd's thrown stone would crack a clay vessel and wake the rustle of ancient scrolls. Among those fragile scraps, the echo of Enoch's message and the giant's final dreams would rise again. After Mahway turned back toward the city of the giants and the days of the flood passed, the earth seemed to close over their story. The ark rose and fell on the great waters, then came to rest. New children learned to walk on clean ground. People spoke of animals saved, of rainbows and covenants, and only a short line in Genesis hinted that once there had been Nephilim, mighty men of old, the dreams that had shaken the giant's sleep, the tablet that slipped through Mahway's hands, and the words Enoch carried from heaven faded from ordinary memory. It was as if the last nights before the flood had dissolved into a darkness no one could enter again. But stories do not die as easily as stones crumble. Sometimes they curl themselves up and sleep in hidden places, waiting for the right moment to wake, far from crowded fields and river valleys. There is a stark land where pale cliffs rise above a heavy, silent sea. Holes open in those cliffs like watching eyes. For centuries, shepherds led their flocks along the paths above the Dead Sea without guessing what rested in the cool hollows behind those rough mouths of rock. Wind moved, dust in and out. Bats stirred. The sun burned the outer stone. Deep inside, wrapped and forgotten, words about the giant's final dreams lay resting as fragile scrolls. In the year 1947, a young Bedouin shepherd wandered among those cliffs, searching for a stray goat. Bored and a little irritated, he picked up a stone and tossed it into the shadow of a cave. Instead of the dull thud he expected, he heard the sharp ring of breaking pottery. The sound was small, but it carried like a bell through time. Climbing up to look, he found tall clay jars resting in the dark, some empty, some still sealed. Inside were rolled pieces of leather and parchment, darkened by age. He did not know it yet, but he had opened the doorway to the library we now call the Dead Sea Scrolls, a hidden collection copied by an ancient community who loved and feared the words of God. Among the familiar scriptures lay fragments of other books, texts almost erased from the world. One of them bore a title the modern world had nearly forgotten: the Book of Giants. Years later, in careful rooms far from the cliffs, scholars would gently unroll those brittle scrolls under soft lamps. Their fingers moved with the care of doctors tending an old and delicate patient. On some fragments, the letters were clear enough to read, written in Aramaic, the everyday language of that land long ago. Names surfaced like stones in a shallow stream: Mahway, Oh Yah, Hahya. Pieces of their dreams appeared beside them. Dreams of a great tree being cut down, of a house collapsing, of a stone tablet falling into the water and sinking beyond reach. Many lines were missing, torn away by time, yet the pattern remained. The giants had seen their own end coming, and the writers at Qumran believed those visions mattered enough to copy and preserve. Imagine one of those scribes sitting alone in a cool chamber carved into the rock. A small oil lamp glows at his elbow. Outside, desert wind scrapes along the cliff face and carries the salt smell of the Dead Sea. Inside, he bends over a strip of prepared leather, reed pen dipping into ink made from soot. Line by slow line, he traces the story of the giants and their dreams. How they sent Mahway to Enoch. How Enoch carried back a word of judgment and sorrow. His handwriting is slow, shaped by habit and prayer. Perhaps he pauses at the line about the falling tablet and closes his eyes for a moment, feeling the weight of that symbol. Then he breathes out, whispers a blessing for those who will one day read, and continues his steady work. The people who gathered at Qumran lived between empire and wilderness. Before them the Dead Sea stretched like a mirror of still judgment, its waters heavy and bitter, refusing to carry life. Behind them, the desert rolled away in folds of stone and sand. They read the prophets and saw, in the proud powers of their own age, shadows of the world before the flood. In kings and armies they recognized the same arrogance that had filled the Nephilim, the same temptation to use heaven's gifts as weapons, the same callousness toward the weak. To copy the Book of Giants was to hold up an old mirror and say to the future, "We have been here before. Let us not sleep through the warning again." For almost 2,000 years that quiet warning lay sealed in jars. wrapped in cloth, hidden in the dark. Empires rose and fell. Languages shifted. New faiths spread across continents. The exact path to the caves faded from maps and memory. Then a bored shepherd's stone broke a pot, and the heavy lids of history moved a little. In the silence of museum rooms and libraries, men and women now leaned close to the same words that were once whispered among those cliff dwellers. Words about giants whose dreams failed to save them, and about a God whose justice and mercy are deeper than any sea. If you close your eyes now, you might imagine the coolness of the cave on your skin, the faint drip of water somewhere in the dark, the smell of old leather and dust. You can picture rows of jars standing in patient silence, each one holding words that slept for centuries. A single stone flies, pottery shatters, and suddenly the stillness is broken. What was hidden begins to speak. The dreams that once shook giants awake before the flood are moving again at the edges of your own thoughts. Not to frighten you, but to invite you gently toward wakefulness, toward a kinder way of walking through the world they once bruised. And as we leave these caves and step back into the wider landscape of forgotten visions, we will see that Qumran was only one doorway, and that the giant's final dreams belong to a larger chorus of buried books and guarded stories, trying, even now, to warn and to heal a restless world. On the far side of another desert, where the Nile bends and green fields cling to its banks before giving way to stone, another hidden library slept beneath the sand, long after the cliffs of Qumran had received their scrolls and sealed them away. Different hands in Egypt gathered their own collection of dangerous books. These were not written in the language of the giants, nor even in the Aramaic that echoed through the caves above the Dead Sea. They were copied in Coptic, the tongue of Egyptian Christians, and many of them bore the marks of visions and revelations that did not sit easily beside the scriptures. The churches were beginning to guard, to shelter them from fire and suspicion. Someone placed them in jars, buried them in a cliffside near a village called Nag Hammadi, and left them to sleep as quietly as the giant's dreams. Centuries passed. Empires shifted like dunes. Those who had hidden the books were forgotten, their reasons buried with them. Yet the earth remembered. In 1945, a group of local men digging for fertilizer in the Egyptian desert struck something hard. Their tools rang against pottery. Inside the shattered jars they found thick, leather-bound codices, their pages dark and rigid with age. At first the find was only curiosity and potential fuel for cooking fires. Slowly, painfully, through sales and rumors and delays, the codices made their way into the hands of scholars. When they were finally opened and read, it was as if another chamber had been added to the underground library of forgotten visions. By lamplight in quiet rooms, translators bent over the Nag Hammadi texts and felt that old, unsettling mixture of awe and caution. Here were gospels that spoke in strange cadences, dialogues where Jesus addressed his disciples in private, treatises that described invisible realms and cosmic battles, with a poetry both haunting and alien. Many of these writings arose from communities on the edges of early Christianity, groups later labeled heretical by bishops who worried about their teachings. Their pages are full of light and shadow, wisdom and confusion interwoven. They do not fit neatly beside the sober lines of the four familiar Gospels. Yet in their own way, they reveal how deeply people of that age wrestled with the mysteries of suffering, evil, and the meaning of the cross. If you listen under the quiet hum of scholarship and debate, another sound runs through these discoveries, as soft as sand shifting under bare feet. It is the sound of human beings reaching toward heaven with words. dreams, and daring interpretations. Some faithful, some flawed, all marked by longing. The communities that hid their books at Nag Hammadi may have feared that their visions would be burned or banned. By sealing them away in jars, they chose obscurity over extinction, trusting that perhaps someday someone would be ready to read what they had seen and heard. In this, their story rhymes with the sect at Qumran, who tucked the Book of Giants and other scrolls into desert caves as the armies of empire approached. Different lands, different languages, but the same instinct to preserve dangerous memories rather than let them be erased. You might imagine one of those Egyptian monks standing on a rocky slope above the Nile, holding a leather codex against his chest while hot wind tugs at his robe. Below, the river glints like a living mirror. Above, the cliff face waits with its natural hollows. He knows that bishops in distant cities are arguing about which books may be read aloud in the assemblies, which visions are safe, which must be put aside for the sake of unity. He has copied texts that speak of unseen realms and secret sayings, words that comforted him in long nights of vigil. Perhaps he fears that if the wrong eyes fall on these pages, they will be destroyed as dangerous. Slowly, reverently, he tucks the codex into a jar, seals it, and leaves it where the stone will guard it better than any wall. Then he walks back down toward his monastery, trusting the earth to keep what the world is not yet ready to hold. For many centuries, only a thin line of memory remained. Church councils settled their lists of sacred books. Ordinary believers prayed, suffered, hoped, and died without ever hearing the titles that now fascinate historians. Yet, beneath their feet, in caves and cuttings, manuscripts slept on. The world changed languages. Kingdoms rose and fell. At last, in the 20th century, the lids were lifted. Qumran spoke of giants, watchers, and the final dreams before a flood. Nag Hammadi whispered of visions, heavenly journeys, and alternate tellings of the story of Jesus. The Gospel of Judas, made public in 2006, added its fractured voice to the chorus. Together, these finds forced scholars and pastors alike to reckon with a truth the ancients already knew. Not every dream, not every revelation belongs in the center of the community's worship. Yet even the rejected stories can teach us something about the fears and hopes of those who told them. Tonight, as you rest, you do not have to decide which of these crowded shelves of forgotten books deserves a place in your own faith. You are simply invited to notice the pattern, again and again, across deserts and centuries. Visions that were too sharp, too strange, or too troubling were hidden away in the earth, like seeds waiting for a different season. The giant's final dreams, the Qumran scrolls, the Nag Hammadi codices, the Gospel of Judas, all show us that human beings have long wrestled with a God who judges and yet loves, who allows freedom and yet refuses to surrender the world to cruelty. These buried libraries hum beneath our feet like a low song, reminding us that even when official histories move on, the questions our ancestors asked in the night remain, and to understand why some stories were treasured and others were hidden, we must now turn to the voices of those early guardians of the Church who, with trembling hands, tried to draw a line around what could be safely proclaimed in the light. In the centuries after the last lines of Scripture were written, the Church stood between two pressures. On one side, ordinary believers carried dreams, questions, and local tales that comforted or unsettled them. On the other, teachers and bishops felt the weight of guarding a fragile, growing faith against confusion. In that tension, some books were gathered into the center of worship, while others, equally ancient and beloved in some places, were edged outward toward the shadows. Among those that drifted from the circle of public reading were writings that spoke of giants, watchers, and the borderland of visions, including the Book of Enoch and the stories we now call the Book of Giants. One of the early voices in this struggle was Irenaeus, a second-century bishop who looked out over a landscape full of competing teachings. Some groups claimed secret revelations open only to a few. Others reshaped the story of Jesus to fit their own systems. Irenaeus loved his people and feared for their clarity. In his work against heresies, he tried to pull scattered threads of belief back into a single cord. In his world, too many visions could open the door to chaos. He was not trying simply to bury truth, but to shelter it. Like a father closing shutters when a storm begins to howl. A few generations later, Athanasius of Alexandria faced storms of his own. He defended the full divinity of Christ against teachings that would have made Jesus less than the eternal Word. In the middle of fierce controversies, he wrote a famous Easter letter listing the books he believed were to be read as Holy Scripture in the churches. Alongside that core, he acknowledged other writings that might be read privately. But he drew a firm line. Visions and apocalypses that did not belong to the apostolic circle were gently pushed to the margins. In that sorting, Enoch and the giant's dreams slipped from the daily hearing of the faithful, even as they lingered in the memories of monks, mystics, and remote communities. If you picture those bishops only as stern censors, you miss their humanity. They were pastors who sat beside the beds of the dying and listened to the confessions of the fearful. They knew how easily a vivid story could capture the heart and drag it away from the simple center of the faith, which for them was the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus. Tales of cosmic battles and giants and secret sayings were not entertainment. They were currents that could pull souls into deep water. So they tightened the circle around stories they considered safe anchors, even if it meant letting other old and mysterious books drift back into silence. Yet the dreams of the giants did not vanish. In the highlands of Ethiopia, far from the centers of imperial theology, communities preserved the Book of Enoch as part of their sacred library. While much of the Christian world forgot Enoch's visions of watchers and floods, Ethiopian believers read them alongside the prophets and apostles. In their liturgies and stories, the strange nights before the flood never completely faded. What had been set aside in one part of the world was cherished in another, like a lamp kept burning in a distant window when the main house had gone dark. Over time, the official lists of scripture hardened into habit. Christians grew up hearing certain readings over and over. The Psalms, the Gospels, the letters, the great vision of Revelation. These texts formed a river that flowed through generations. Along its banks, though, in monasteries, deserts, and mountain churches, other little streams trickled on, carrying Enochian stories, apocryphal gospels, and memories of ancient visions. When pastors warned against some of these writings, it was not always from cynicism or hunger for power. Often it came from a desire to protect their people from confusion. Still, every drawing of a boundary leaves something outside the fence, and those excluded stories did not stop speaking. They whispered from margins and fragments and half-remembered quotes. For you lying here tonight, listening in the dark, all this may feel far away. Bishops in long robes, councils in distant cities, mountain churches preserving books that never reached your shelf. Yet their choices shape the air you breathe when you open a Bible or hear a sermon and think you already know the whole story of the flood. The silence about giants and their dreams is not an accident. It is the result of many careful decisions. Knowing that does not require you to distrust the scriptures you have received. It simply invites you to understand that there were other voices at the edges, like the Book of Giants, whose warnings were allowed to sleep so that simpler hearts would not be overwhelmed. And still, for all the trimming and guarding, there remained something no council could canonize or condemn: the quiet language of dreams. No bishop could forbid a conscience from being stirred in the night. No list of approved books could prevent a worried heart from seeing rising waters behind its closed eyes, or collapsing towers when life began to crack. Whatever happened to Enoch's writings in the public reading, the God who once spoke through dreams to Pharaoh, to Joseph, to Daniel, and even to giants, did not cease to move within the sleep of his creatures. As the formal story of the church grew more focused, the personal stories of dream and warning went on, generation after generation, like a river flowing under the floorboards. So when we think of Irenaeus and Athanasius drawing lines around which visions belonged in the bright center of faith, we do well to remember both their wisdom and their limits. They could decide which books to proclaim aloud, but they could not reach into the tender interior places where God still whispers through symbols and night scenes only you will ever see. The giants' final dreams may have been set aside as dangerous reading for congregations, but their pattern remains, pulsing underneath history. That pattern is this: before judgment comes, warnings are given, often in the language of sleep. And to step into that mystery, we must now turn from the shelves of councils and codices to the deeper question of what dreams can be when they arrive, not as random flickers of the brain, but as gentle alarms ringing in the soul. In every age, people have closed their eyes and stepped into landscapes they did not choose. Sometimes those inner worlds are soft and harmless, filled with familiar faces and gentle impossibilities. Other times they are sharp and unsettling. A river runs where no river should be. A house crumbles without sound. A voice calls your name from a place you cannot see. You wake with your heart beating hard and tell yourself it was only a dream, something your mind invented and will soon forget. Yet somewhere deep inside, a question lingers like a small light. What if not every dream is random? What if some are quiet messengers, given just before the ground begins to move? Scripture answers that question with scenes scattered like stars across its pages. A young Joseph dreams of sheaves of grain bowing down, of sun and moon and stars bending toward him. Images that will later explain why his brothers sell him and why famine will drive whole nations to Egypt. Pharaoh, secure in his palace, dreams of fat cows and thin cows, of full and withered ears of grain, night pictures that carry 7 years of plenty and 7 of hunger on their backs. Far away in Babylon, Nebuchadnezzar dreams of a towering statue shattered by a stone cut without hands. A vision that shakes him so deeply he forgets the details and demands that someone tell him both the dream and its meaning. In every case, God chooses the night to speak of what is coming, not to paralyze, but to prepare. When we place those familiar stories beside the fragments of the Book of Giants, something quiet and surprising happens. The giants' visions stop looking like stray myths at the edge of faith. They take their place inside the same pattern. Just as Pharaoh's dream warned of a flood of hunger and Nebuchadnezzar's warned of the rise and fall of kingdoms, the giants' dreams warned of a flood of water that would wash away their violent age. Their images were chosen to match the world they had built. Towers and trees and tablets falling. But the rhythm was the same. First comes a season of warning. Then comes a space for decision. Only after that does judgment arrive. Steady and unhurried, refusing to turn aside. The deep difference lies not in whether God spoke, but in how the hearers responded. Pharaoh woke, troubled, and sent for Joseph, humbling himself enough to listen to a foreign prisoner who could read what heaven was saying. Nebuchadnezzar raged, yet he listened as Daniel described the statue and its fall. And for a time he honored the God who reveals mysteries. The giants listened to Enoch and felt the truth of his words tighten around their hearts. Yet most of them did not turn. Their dreams became accurate but unused warnings, bright signs on a road they refused to leave. When the waters finally rose, they did not arrive as a surprise. They simply confirmed what the giants' own nights had already shown them. You and I may never dream of tablets in the sky or trees tall enough to shelter nations. Yet the same gentle pattern can thread quietly through our smaller lives. A person hiding in quiet dishonesty may begin to see, again and again, images of exposure, of standing in bright light with nowhere to hide. Someone ignoring the exhaustion in their body may dream of engines overheating, of bridges cracking under too much weight. A relationship slowly fraying may surface in sleep as a house whose walls pull apart, letting in wind and rain. We wake, shake our heads, and say that dreams are strange. But sometimes, if we paused and listened, we might hear in them the echo of that older rhythm, the mercy that sends soft whispers before anything breaks. This does not mean that every nightmare carries a message from heaven. Minds can be wounded. Bodies hold memories. Some dreams are simply the nervous system unspooling what it cannot yet lay down. Still, even there, a kindness is at work, giving fear a symbolic space to move instead of letting it sit unseen in the dark. The giant's final visions sit at the far edge of this wide spectrum, where the human and the divine meet in a shared language of images. Their dreams were not random storms in the brain. They were spiritual alarms ringing at the foundations of a corrupt world, saying, as gently as judgment can say anything, that the way things were could not continue. There is a strange comfort in knowing that even at the worst moment of their story, the giants were not abandoned without warning. God did not let the flood ambush them from a clear sky. He troubled their sleep, sent images tailored to their particular pride, and raised up a man who could walk between earth and heaven to explain what those images meant. Judgment came, but not without lanterns lit along the path. If that is how he treated even the Nephilim, born from a rebellion between heaven and earth, how much more gently will he deal with you, lying here in the dark with a heart already turned toward him in curiosity and fear and hope. Tonight, as you remember your own uneasy dreams, you are not asked to become an expert interpreter. You are invited instead to a humble awareness that sometimes the night carries hints of what needs attention in the day. When a dream repeats, when an image will not leave the edges of your thoughts, you can hold it up before God like a small offering, not demanding a lightning bolt of explanation, simply asking if there is something here you are meant to see. In that quiet prayer, you step into the same long story that runs from Pharaoh's troubled sleep through Nebuchadnezzar's statue and all the way back to Mahway's falling tablet. The story of people who took their dreams seriously enough to bring them into the light. And as we move forward, we will step from these ancient warnings into the softer and more familiar terrain of modern nightmares, listening for how floods and falling towers still appear behind the eyes of those who have never heard the giants' names at all. Long after the ark grounded and the flood slipped into memory, people kept dreaming of water. They dreamed of waves rolling down familiar streets, of dark tides climbing stairwells, of cities sinking in slow motion beneath a heavy sky. They dreamed of buildings cracking like shells, bridges twisting, towers sliding sideways into clouds of dust. Most of these never read the scraps from Qumran, yet their inner nights carry scenes that rhyme with the giant's final visions. What once belonged to ancient stone halls now moves quietly through small bedrooms and narrow apartments, surfacing behind the eyes of those who fall asleep, with screens still glowing and news still echoing in their minds. If you have ever woken to the memory of rising water, of a wall of sea bearing down on a place you love, you know how such dreams cling. Even after you realize that your floor is dry and your walls are sound, a thin unease remains, as if part of you is still standing ankle-deep in that impossible tide. Sometimes the images borrow shapes from headlines and history, from real floods and storms. Sometimes they seem to rise from deeper aquifers of fear, ancient and impersonal, as though the human family still remembers, far beneath the surface, that the world once came to the edge of ending in water. Psychologists can say wise things about this. Water, they tell us, often stands for emotion, for forces too large to manage with thought alone. A flood can reflect change that sweeps away the familiar, a crumbling building, a life structure under strain, a relationship or vocation cracking along lines we have tried not to see. Such insights are gifts, not enemies, helping us understand how minds and bodies process their pressures. Yet beyond personal history, there are moments when a dream feels heavier, as if it were touching not only your private story, but a wider trembling in the world. Echoing the nights when giants and ordinary men alike sensed a true flood approaching. We live again in days when the edges of things feel thin. Seas creep higher along coasts. Ice groans and splits in distant cold. Storms grow stronger. Systems strain under their own weight. Towers of technology rise so fast that no one can say what will happen if they ever begin to fail. Our feeds show us neighborhoods underwater, bridges failing, buildings leaning at impossible angles after the ground has shaken. It is no wonder that our sleep borrows these pictures. The giants dreamed of their world collapsing long before the first crack opened. We, too, feel in our bones that not everything we have built can last forever. And at night, when we cannot distract ourselves, those unspoken tremors sometimes take the form of dark water and falling stone. Perhaps you have walked through such a dream. You stand in a place you know well, a childhood street or an office corridor, when a low rushing begins. Like distant surf where no sea should be, you turn and see water pushing toward you, slow and unstoppable. Or you are high in a tower and feel the floor tilt. The walls groan, glass shudder in its frames. You wake with your heart in your throat, grateful to find everything still, yet aware that something in you has been quietly whispering that your life is more fragile than you pretend. In that brief moment you stand, in your own small way, where the giants once stood, facing the truth that no tower of achievement or control can make a soul invulnerable. The comfort is not that such dreams will stop, but that you do not meet them alone. The giants had Mahway and Enoch standing between their terror and the word from heaven. You have one greater than Enoch, a presence nearer than your own breath, who has walked into storms and spoken peace over waves. When you wake from a nightmare of flood or collapse, you can breathe slowly and invite God into the image instead of pushing it away. You can ask, with simple honesty, whether there is anything in your life being gently highlighted, any tower leaning, any dam strained. Any pattern of harm you are being invited to release before it breaks. Not every dream will carry such a message, but those that do become opportunities for mercy rather than omens of doom. There is also a collective layer to these echoes. Just as the giants' dreams were not only about their own fate, but about an age drawing to a close. Some of our nightmares seem to hold a shared unease. We sense that systems built on exploitation and indifference cannot endure forever. That ways of living which ignore the weak and exhaust the earth will one day meet their limit. We may not know how change will come, but our sleep shows us images of markets flooding, networks going dark, shining towers standing empty. These are not charts to predict the future. They are invitations to live differently now, to build households and communities that could float like small arcs when larger structures begin to sink. For tonight, though, you are not asked to carry the weight of the world. You are simply one person lying in the dark, listening to the story of giants whose nightmares came true and of a God who still chooses to whisper before he acts. Let the images of rising waters and falling towers that have troubled you in the past be held now in a softer light. They are signs that your heart is awake enough to know that some things are fragile and that you long for something steadier. The giants clung to their strength and ignored the deeper invitation. You are free to do otherwise, to let each unsettling dream nudge you toward trust, toward simpler living, toward making peace while there is time. As the soundscape around you settles into a steady hush, like waves far out on a calm sea, breathe in slowly and breathe out. In a few moments we will step back through the veil of time and return to the last night before the rain began to fall, to stand beside those ancient halls as their final dreams reached their sharpest edge. For now, rest in the knowledge that whatever images your mind may offer, they rise and fall within the hands of one who is never surprised by any storm. The last night before the rain did not arrive with thunder. Sunset laid its usual gold along the walls of the giant city. Smoke curled from hearths. Children ran between doorways, and songs drifted up from courtyards as if nothing in the world could change. Far away, on a lonely hill, the ark stood, finished and silent, its seams sealed, its animals restless inside. Between that wooden refuge and the stone halls of the Nephilim, the space of one more night stretched thin, like the last fragile thread holding an old garment together. Since his return, Mahway had spoken Enoch's message until the words felt worn in his mouth. He had told the giants that their dreams spoke truth, that the watchers were bound, that the great tree of their power would be cut down, that water would rise higher than any tower they had built. Some listened with their jaws clenched and eyes averted. Others scoffed, calling his vision the fancy of a mind dazzled by strange hills and lonely stars. Yet even those who mocked him found their gazes straying toward the horizon, measuring the distance to the hills as evening settled and a faint coolness crept into the air. Inside the main hall, torches hissed along the stone walls. Long tables groaned beneath platters of meat and baskets of bread. Wine dark as river water sloshed in heavy cups. The first among the giants, seated on a raised throne carved with scenes of victory, demanded that Mahway repeat every word Enoch had spoken. The giant obeyed, voice steady but low. He spoke of the coming flood, of a world washed clean, of an ark built by hands that would never fit a warrior's sword. When he finished, a slow murmur moved through the hall. For a moment, no one lifted a cup. The only sound was the crackle of pitch on burning brands. Then, as if some invisible string had been plucked too hard, the giants laughed. Music burst forth, louder than on other nights. Drums pounded against the stone like fists. Flutes and strings tangled in wild melodies. Boasts flew around the room like thrown knives. They spoke of storms they had ridden through, of rivers they had leapt in a single stride, of cities they had crushed underfoot. Each story rose higher, more exaggerated, as if they could shout down a verdict already written in the heights. Yet in the darker corners, some giants fell quiet. One stared into his cup and saw not wine but the black surface from his dreams. Streets and roofs, inverted beneath a skin of water. Another remembered the towering tree in his sleep, birds fleeing from its branches as an unseen axe bit into its trunk. Without quite knowing why, he slipped out into the night to stand beneath the cold brightness of the stars. Beyond the walls, in humbler houses, smaller lives moved with different rhythms. There were families who had watched Noah at work year after year, seen timber hauled to that unlikely hill, heard his calm warnings about a flood to come. Some had mocked him openly, some had shrugged and gone on with their days. A few, carrying their own troubling dreams of rising rivers and crumbling homes, had begun to listen. That night they gathered their children a little closer, spoke more softly, and found themselves waking often, staring into the darkness as if expecting to hear the sound of distant surf where no sea should be. One by one, fires burned low. The noise in the giants' hall thinned as heavy bodies slumped onto stone beds. Armor half unfastened, cloaks tangled. Sleep took them, not gently, but like a tide pulling at roots. Their dreams returned with new sharpness. Again they saw towers tilt and slide away. Again they felt the floor buckling beneath them, the sky sagging like a heavy ceiling. In some visions the ark appeared far off, a dark shape riding quiet water, a single lamp glowing warm inside. Hands stretched toward it, huge and desperate, but distance held them back. A few giants woke with damp faces and a pressure in their chests that felt uncomfortably like regret. Out in the courtyard, Mahway could not bring himself to lie down. He walked slowly between the great pillars, his bare feet feeling the chill that had crept into the stone. Above him, the constellations burned in their appointed places, serene and unchanged. The same patterns he had flown past in his dream when the tablet cracked and fell. He whispered Enoch's words under his breath, not to test them, but to keep from forgetting. For the first time in his long life, he did not ask whether his strength could outlast what was coming. He asked instead whether there was any gentleness left in a world that had learned to bow before him in fear. Sometime in the thin hours, when night is deepest and even insects fall still, a strange hush settled over the land. The air grew cool and expectant. In his wooden house on the hill, Noah lay awake, listening to the slow breathing of his family, to the shuffle and snort of the animals penned within the ark's shadowed belly. His work was finished. He had preached. He had built. He had gathered. Now there was nothing left but to wait for a command he could not hasten and could not delay. Above, the sky that had been hard and clear for so long began to soften. Wisps of cloud drew themselves quietly across the stars like thin veils, out over the city of the giants, over the homes of the small and the strong alike. Something in the high air loosened. No trumpet sounded. No lightning split the horizon. Only, in the grey just before dawn, did the first cold drop of water form, tremble on an invisible current, and then fall. It struck stone outside the great hall with a tiny sound no ear was yet awake to hear, darkening a single grain of dust. Another drop followed, and another, spaced far apart, like the first cautious taps on a closed door. As the giants slept on, and Noah rose to make his final round within the ark, the last night before the flood ended, and the day began when their dreams would step out of the secret theatre of sleep and into the world itself. Morning came grey and low. The air carried a coolness that did not belong to that season, a thin edge that slipped under cloaks and crept along stone. In the city of the giants, servants stepped out to draw water and paused at the feel of something soft on their faces. They looked up and saw the sky filmed with a veil of cloud. A sheet stretched from horizon to horizon. While they were still staring, a droplet formed, swelled, and fell, darkening a patch of earth. Then another, then another. At first, the rain meant little more than inconvenience. The giants muttered at the wetness on the steps of their halls. Slaves hurried to cover open courtyards. Children laughed and stuck out their tongues to catch the cold drops. It had rained before. Brief showers that washed dust from leaves and cooled hot stone. No one could see, in those first faint streaks, the fulfillment of the dreams that had disturbed them in the night. Yet as the morning wore on, the drizzle did not break. It settled into a steady, quiet fall between earth and heaven. Beyond the city, Noah stood at the door of the ark, listening to the soft patter on the wood. The sound was unlike the creak of timbers or the shuffle of animals. It was the music he had waited for, the promised sign that the deep was stirring. Behind him, inside the dim belly of the vessel, creatures breathed in slow rhythms, some restless, some already lulled by the tapping on the roof. His family moved like shadows along the inner walkways, checking bindings, soothing frightened beasts, speaking in low voices. Noah laid his hand against the damp planks and closed his eyes in gratitude. The God who had warned him had also given him a shelter. Back in the stone halls, the mood began to shift. Shallow channels along the streets, meant to catch small runoff, now ran with thin ribbons that did not recede. Puddles gathered in the hollows of courtyards. The rain, still gentle, threaded itself into every open place, finding seams between stones, tracing the curves of carved steps. Some giants shrugged and ordered more wine, convinced the storm would pass, as all storms had. Others felt their skin prickle with an unease they could not name. The rhythm of the falling water sounded disturbingly like the heartbeat of their own dreams. As hours slipped by, the rain thickened. Droplets struck stone with more insistence. Roofs drummed softly. The sheet above grew darker at the edges, folds of heavier cloud rolling in like great animals approaching in silence. In low valleys beyond the walls, small streams swelled into brown currents. The earth, generous in its thirst at first, began to glisten and resist. Water pooled instead of sinking. Threads became rivulets. Rivulets became streams that forgot their old paths. For the giants, the dreams now stepped out of sleep and into sight. One stood on a balcony and watched as the river below climbed its own banks and slipped quietly into the lower streets. It did not roar or rage. It simply rose, unstoppably, finding every dip and alleyway. Another, who had once dreamed of a towering tree, saw water curl around the bases of the pillars lining the great hall. Stone that had always seemed invulnerable looked suddenly small against the soft, persistent touch of this new element. Some ordered barriers and trenches, their commands scattered like leaves. The earth could no longer carry the weight of their certainty. Meanwhile, inside the ark, the same waters sounded different. They struck wood instead of stone, Every drop that fell on the roof above Noah's head was both a sign of judgment and a lullaby of safety. The ark rocked gently as the ground beneath it softened and shifted. Animals shuffled, then settled. Learning the slow sway, the family moved through the corridors with small lamps, their steps guided by trust more than sight. They could hear the distant deepening of the storm. Yet within their wooden womb the sound became a constant, soothing roar, like a vast drum beating time for a world being washed and made ready to begin again. From high windows, the giants watched the line between land and water blur. Roads disappeared under a dull, rippling sheen. Fields became shallow lakes. Then deeper ones, the lower quarters of the city vanished. Roofs barely visible as dark islands in the spreading grey. Panic moved where laughter had been. Great doors were shut against the encroaching flood, as if wood and iron could keep out what had already soaked the foundations. In their fear, some of the mighty remembered Mahway's words and Enoch's warning. They rushed to higher rooms, to towers that now felt less like symbols of triumph and more like fragile stilts above a rising sea. Yet even as the waters rose, there was in the rain a strange gentleness. It did not fall in explosive bursts meant to shock and stun. It fell steadily, evenly, giving time for hearts to understand what eyes were seeing. The giants had been given their nights of warning. Now they had their day of proof. The flood was not a sudden rage, but a long, sorrowful exhale, washing over the violence and pride that had bruised the earth. For those who clung to their own strength, it was terror. For those shut inside the ark, it was the sound of promise kept, a path toward a future they could not yet imagine. Somewhere between sky and deep, between stone hall and wooden hull, the dreams of the giants met their fulfillment. The tablet Mahway had seen fell at last, not as a visible slab, but as a verdict written into rain and rising tide. The great tree was cut down, not with an axe you could see, but with roots loosened by saturation, with soil sliding away from trunks that had stood too long in stolen power. The towers cracked, not from a single blow, but from the quiet undermining of their bases. The world the giants knew dissolved around them into motion, their reflections scattering in the broken mirror of the flood. And over it all, unseen by the frantic and the sleeping alike, God watched, grieving every life lost and every cruelty washed away, guarding the small ark where a remnant floated on the face of the waters, carried forward by the same deep that had opened to bring an end to an age. In the long arc of this story, the giants stand like dark mountains on your horizon, impressive and terrible, yet far from the narrow path where you walk. It is easy to hear of their dreams and their fall and think, that belongs to another age, another kind of being. Yet when the echoes fade, something quieter remains. Beneath all the stone and storm, their final nights reveal a God who warns before he wounds, who whispers before he allows anything to break. They show hearts invited to turn while there was still time, hearts that mostly refused, held gently. The giants' last dreams become less a legend meant to frighten and more a mirror held up to each of us as we move through our own brief days. You may never build towers that scrape the clouds or stride through markets that fall silent at your passing, but you know what it is to lean on something as if it could not fail. It might be a talent, a relationship, a savings account, a carefully tended reputation. These things are not wrong, they are gifts. Just as strength and knowledge were meant to be gifts for the giants. The danger comes when the heart quietly shifts its weight from the giver to the gift, from trust in God to trust in what our hands can measure and control. The giants' dreams were mercy aimed at that shift. A last attempt to show them that their foundations were softer than they believed. In your life, the same kindness may arrive as a discomfort you cannot explain. A sense that something you have been resting on is not as steady as it once felt. When that unease rises, you have a choice they rarely made. You can let it push you toward louder feasts, more distraction, more noise, more insistence that everything is fine. Or you can do the quieter, braver thing and bring it into the light. You can sit, as you are sitting now, in the stillness of this night, and say to God in the simplest words that you are afraid of the cracks you see and that you do not want to learn everything the hard way. In that surrender, the giant's story bends away from tragedy and becomes instruction. Their unheeded warnings become fuel for your humility. You allow their last nights to spare you some heartbreak in your own. There is another layer, softer and more tender. Many listening to this story are not standing in the giant's sandals at all. You are not the one wielding power carelessly. You are the one bruised by someone else's tower, someone else's flood of decisions. You carry anxiety like a constant background hum. And your dreams, when they come, are not warnings of what you might do, but echoes of what has been done to you. In that place, the tale of the giant still holds a gift. It tells you that God has always seen the harm done by the strong to the small, that he has never been indifferent to the way violence and arrogance soak into the soil. The flood is not his cruel delight. It is his refusal to let such harm have the last word. Even if your own story feels waterlogged with old pain, you are held by one who hated the giant's cruelty more fiercely than you ever could, and who has already begun, in quiet ways, to drain the fields where those waters once stood. When you lie down to sleep and old fears rise, you do not have to sort out which dreams are messages and which are simply tired minds unwinding. You are invited instead to trust the character of the one who stands behind every true warning. He is not searching for reasons to condemn you. He is not waiting for you to fail so he can send a private flood. The cross, standing on another hill far from the ark, is his own proof that he would rather walk into death himself than abandon you to it. Judgment remains a real current in the world. But for those who turn toward Christ, it has already passed through his body. What remains are the gentler corrections of a father who loves you too much to leave your hand on a hot surface. The nudges and night whispers meant to lead you into wider, freer places. So as you breathe here in the dark, listening to the imagined rain and the distant groan of ancient beams, let the giant's final dreams become a quiet backdrop to your own small prayers. You can name the towers you are afraid of losing, the floods you dread, the people you love who seem to be standing at the edge of rising waters. You can lay them down, one by one, into the hands that shape the deep and set its boundaries. You can ask, without fear, to be shown what needs to change in you and to be sheltered from what you cannot change around you. The same God who once warned through visions and scrolls and prophets is present with you now in the quiet of your room, closer than the sound in your headphones, more gentle than the breath that lifts your chest. And as this chapter draws to its soft close, let its last movement carry you from the crumbling halls of the giants into a very different interior, made not of stone but of wood and peace. The flood has not vanished from the story, but its meaning is shifting for Noah and his family, for the animals asleep in the darkness. Those same waters became a floor that lifted them, a surface that carried them toward a cleansed horizon. In the same way, you are invited now to picture your own heart stepping across a threshold, leaving the echoing chambers of fear and control, and nestling into a quiet ark of refuge, where the rain outside is only a steady sound that helps you rest, and where, even as the world beyond may shake, you are gently held. Inside the ark, night had its own weather. The roar of the rain outside blurred into a single, steady hush, like the sound of a distant waterfall wrapped in wool. Wooden beams creaked softly as the great vessel rose and dipped on the swelling deep. The air smelled of fresh-cut timber, of animals and straw, of lamp oil burning with small, steady flames. Noah moved along the inner corridor with a lantern in his hand, checking ropes and gates, whispering calming words to restless creatures. Each step he took was a quiet answer to the giants' long nightmares, where their dreams had shown towers cracking and halls filling with water. This sheltered space now floated, light on the very flood that had undone their strength. In one corner of the ark, a child fought sleep. Every tilt of the floor beneath her feet stirred a flicker of alarm. She had heard the stories of the storm to come, seen the skies darken, watched the water reach up hungry fingers toward the familiar fields. Now she lay on a simple pallet, listening to the drumming on the roof and the hooves shifting in nearby stalls. Noah knelt beside her and set the lantern where its glow could reach her face without glaring in her eyes. He spoke of birds that would one day return with leaves in their beaks, of mountains slowly emerging from the water, of a sky that would clear. The same rain that frightened her now, he said, was carrying them toward that gentle future. Little by little, her breaths deepened, her fingers relaxed around the blanket. The storm outside did not lessen, but under the steady rhythm of her grandfather's voice, its meaning changed. For you listening now, this ark is more than an old wooden shell bobbing on an ancient sea. It is a picture drawn in wood and water of the refuge your soul is offered every time you turn toward God in trust. The giants built halls to impress and intimidate, yet their walls could not hold back judgment. Noah built something humbler, a place designed not to tower but to float, not to dominate but to endure. In the language of later scripture, Christ himself becomes such an ark, a shelter into which any who are weary or afraid may step. Within that living refuge, the storms outside do not immediately disappear, but they change shape. They become a backdrop rather than a verdict, a sound against which you can rest instead of a sentence hanging over your head. Imagine, just for a moment, that your own heart is a small room within that ark. The walls are simple wood, warm to the touch. A low lamp burns, casting a soft, golden circle. Outside, you can hear the rain of your worries, the waves of your responsibilities, the dull pounding of headlines and expectations. In this room, however, everything narrows to a calm center. You sit or lie down on a simple bed, feeling the gentle sway of a vessel carried by hands you cannot see. Every tilt and rise reminds you that you are not anchored in the flood itself, but cradled above it, held by a grace that does not depend on your strength or understanding. In that quiet interior, the giants' last dreams finally release their hold. Their visions of tablets falling and trees being cut down have done their work, not to torment you, but to convince you that no tower of self-made safety can last forever. You turn your gaze from those crumbling halls and focus instead on the one who invited you aboard. His voice does not shout over the storm. It speaks close to your ear, saying that he has already walked into the deepest waters and come back, that nothing in this flood is stronger than his promise. The judgment that once threatened to sweep you away has been met and carried at the cross. What remains is discipline shaped by love and a refuge that cannot be sunk. As you breathe slowly, in and out, you may notice how the sound of the rain begins to resemble a lullaby rather than a threat. Each drop is a small reminder that something old is being washed away, that patterns of harm and fear are loosening their grip on you and on the world. You do not have to see the horizon yet. Inside the ark, windows are few and small. What matters is not your view but your company. God is with you in this cramped and holy space, sharing your air, counting your breaths, holding your questions without hurry. The giants once lay awake in halls built on pride, terrified by what their minds showed them. You lie here in a quieter hall built on mercy, allowed to sleep while the storm does its necessary work outside. There will come a day, in their story and in yours, when the door opens for Noah. It was the moment a dove returned with a fresh olive leaf, and the waters had drawn back enough to reveal solid ground. For you, it may be a season when the pressure eases, when the circumstances that once felt like an endless flood begin to recede. You will step out, blinking, into air that smells different, cleaner somehow, even if nothing around you looks dramatically changed. The time spent in the ark, in trust and hiddenness, will have altered you. You will be slower to build towers on sand, quicker to seek shelter in God before storms hit, more gentle with others whose houses are starting to leak. But that day is not tonight. Tonight the invitation is simpler. You are asked only to lie down in this imagined wooden room, to feel the floor gently shifting under you, to hear the rain as a steady, soothing sound. You are not the giants, ignoring warnings at the edge of a rising sea. You are the small, beloved sleeper inside the ark of peace, watched over by a presence that does not slumber. Let your jaw soften, your shoulders release, your hands grow loose. Let each exhale carry with it a little of the fear that clung to you when you began this story. Outside, the waters rise and fall. Inside, you are held. The rain has quieted now in our story. The ark rests. The waters have begun to fall, and the giants' halls lie somewhere on the sea floor of history, their stones softened by time. What remains, above the surface of myth and fragment, are those last strange nights when they dreamed of water, of falling towers, of a tablet slipping from their hands. We have followed their path from fear to warning, from Enoch's message to the opening of the deep. The central question we began with was simple and haunting. What did the giants know before the flood? And why were their dreams hidden for so long? In the end, their dreams were not riddles for us to solve like puzzles. They were windows into the heart of a God who loved the world too much to let violence run forever unchecked. The fragments at Qumran, the echoes in the Ethiopian Book of Enoch, the buried libraries of Nag Hammadi, and beyond, all tell us that someone cared enough to copy and hide these memories. The giants saw their own strength crumble ahead of time. They were given a chance to understand that no power built on harm can last. Their dreams went underground for centuries, sleeping in caves and jars, so that in an age like ours, haunted by rising waters, fragile towers, and restless hearts, we could finally hear them again and choose a different response. Where they clung to their halls, you are invited into an ark. Where they drowned in their own unrepented story, you are offered a refuge built not of gopher wood, but of grace, in Christ, the ultimate Enoch and Noah combined. The warnings and the shelter meet. He carries the weight of judgment and opens a door of safety wide enough for every anxious soul. The giant's final visions show what happens when mercy is refused. The cross shows what happens when mercy goes all the way down into the flood and rises again. Both stand in the background of your life, but only one is meant to shape your sleep. Not the terror of being swept away, but the quiet assurance that you are already being carried. So, as you lie here now, in your own small room with its familiar shadows, let this whole story narrow into something very simple. You are seen. The God who troubled the giant's dreams for the sake of the world's healing sees the places where you are afraid, the things you cannot hold together by effort alone. He knows the private floods you dread, the towers in your life that feel as though they might crack, and instead of leaving you to face them alone, he steps into your night and says, "Come inside, rest, while I steer this vessel through what you cannot control." If it helps, you can let this next moment be a gentle prayer. You might say, quietly inside your heart, "Lord, I give you my fears. I give you my unfinished stories and the things that keep me awake. If there is anything in my life that needs to change, show me in your time, in ways I can bear. Tonight, let me sleep in your ark, not in the halls of my own worry. Watch over those I love. Guard my thoughts. Speak only what will heal me. Even in my dreams, you do not need perfect words. He understands the language of sighs and of silence. Now allow everything to soften. Your jaw, your shoulders, the muscles around your eyes. Feel the bed holding your weight the way the waters once held the ark. If you hear a fan, distant traffic, or the soft hum of your room, let those sounds become like a far-off rain, steady and harmless. With every slow exhale, imagine another layer of old fear sliding away, sinking down where it can no longer trouble you. The giant's final dreams can fade now, like waves rolling back from the shore. What stays is a single, steady truth. You are not alone in the storm. Sleep may come in pieces or in one long, quiet river. Either way, you are free to drift, long before you open your eyes again. The one who watched the first flood and the last giant will still be watching over you. The deep has opened and closed many times in the long history of the world, but his care has never wavered. May your night be held in that care. May your dreams, if they come, be gentle, and if they are not, may you still wake, knowing that even the darkest images rise and fall within a love that will not let you go.